class, we'll be learning about the 70s and 80s and the events that took place that eventually transpired and resulted in the presidency of Ronald Reagan. On June 17, 1972, 5 men broke into the Watergate building into an office of the Democratic National Committee. Basically, they were trying to obtain secret documents in order to help with the re-election committee of President Nixon. Nixon eventually wins the 1972 election and apparently seems to be clear with the Watergate burglary, even after his participation inside of it. Question.
Where's the Watergate building located?
The Watergate building is located in Washington, D.C. Good question. Now, one of the main reasons that Nixon was forced out of power is because of the power of the press in the Washington Post. 2 reporters for the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, did not cease to relent, unlike other reporters that just quit after seeing that no evidence was showing up after the burglary. The 2 reporters used their inside source, Deep Throat, which was a secret identity given to a man later found out to be Robert Fell. And they used him to confirm information and basically guide them on their way to solving the mystery of the Watergate burglary. Another reason why Nixon fell from power was due to his taping system that he installed in the White House. He used the taping system in selected rooms, also the Oval Office, and to basically record for personal records. In one of the cases with the Supreme Court, United States versus Nixon, the Supreme Court ordered Nixon to give up the tapes in order to use it as evidence against him. One of the tapes, known as the smoking gun tape, basically had Nixon admitting to being a part of the burglary because he basically told the FBI to halt their investigation due to it being it was a national security matter. Now, Nixon knew that giving these tapes to the Supreme Court would basically end his presidency, and that in order to avoid being impeached, he resigned from office, which left the country with no leader, and someone needed to step up, and the time was now.
So also during Nixon's presidency was the first of 2 OPEC oil crises, the first one taking place in 1973. The first one was caused when a bunch of Arab nations attacked Israel on Yom Kippur, and the U.S. in turn gave aid to Israel because they were an ally, and the Arab nations who controlled most of the oil that America was getting, they didn't approve of that. So starting with Libya and their decision to limit American production, several Arab nations quickly followed. So because there was a shortage of oil, the government decided to step in, Nixon's administration, and try to regulate a little bit of it so that it wouldn't be a complete panic. The first thing Nixon did was he appointed an energy czar, William E. Simon, who instituted price rationing and other ways of rationing oil, including odd-even rationing. It's Nixon on the left and Simon on the right. So obviously there were long lines of gas. Many stations didn't even have gas. One study in 1974 showed that 20% of American gas stations had no gas. And there was a lot of violence that broke out, obviously a lot of panic. The crisis eventually ended with a treaty. However, the nation still they weren't very happy with Nixon because 1, he was in charge and this happened, and 2, he didn't do many helpful things to to help the situation. You got your long lines. This is a pretty famous picture at your gas stations. Obviously, there was violence. We got some riots in the 70s here. I was talking to Ms. Horn earlier today. She said that she remembered coming back from college one year and she had to stop at a gas station with her mother. And she remembers how frustrating it was to have to wait in line for gas. So Nixon's out of office after Watergate. Jimmy Carter comes in, and in 1979, the second oil crisis happens. It occurred when the Shah of Iran fled his country, and a new leader became in charge. But a lot of people weren't happy with the new leader, so protests. A lot of the protesters, including oil workers, they weren't working, and production dropped significantly, and obviously supply and demand prices go up. Steven?
What year was this?
This was 1979.
Will that be on the test?
I don't know. Learn everything. You're taking solid notes there. So, though a lot of other OPEC nations besides Iran, like Saudi Arabia, increased oil oil production, there was still a big enough decrease in production to create another panic in America. So President Jimmy Carter, in his infinite wisdom, decided to terminate Iranian imports, which further jacked up prices of oil. So eventually, a lot of the people, because it was the second oil crisis in one decade, began to think that it was a hoax. One telephone survey showed that 54% of Americans believed that this second oil crisis was a fake one put on by oil companies to drive up prices and therefore profits. Carter was never able to, disprove these myths, not because they were true, but it was just pretty difficult to put those away after so much of America believed them. Carter eventually had one speech in which he told Americans to reduce their need for energy. And, 1970s America, they don't want to be told what to do. His popularity is going to drop, and people are going to become frustrated with him because his only solution is for them to change. He doesn't have a tangible plan. Even though the problem was completely an Arab thing, Carter received most of the blame, as Nixon did, simply because he was the man in charge, and it happened under his tutelage, and he couldn't do anything about it.
To conclude Henry's point, the government did not do enough to help in the OPEC oil crisis. Carter and Nixon, both presidents, failed, and the public did not support them, which led to the eventual election of Ronald Reagan. Then, for Cole's point,
Jelly Cave.
Yeah, I'm good. Go
Alright,
go.
Gizmos away.
No, we just started Jelly Cave.
You don't get a minute?
15 seconds for Gizmos.
Oh, I got that katana.
How'd you pass me?
10 seconds.
No.
Into the gauntlet.
5.
Go.
No.
Go.
Are you
Oh!
serious?
Gizmos away.
Alright, fine.
Rebirth of the Republican Party was led by figures such as Barry Goldwater, who pushed the conservative agenda for the Republicans, and Ronald Reagan, who was rallied behind by the younger Republicans. Ronald Reagan's fame stemmed from these two people, President Richard Nixon and President Jimmy Carter. Richard Nixon, with the Watergate scandal, he was a moderate Republican, because back in the 1970s, the Republican Party was split between the moderates and the conservatives. So when Nixon's moderate Republicans were found guilty of the Watergate scandal, it led to a decrease in support for their side of the Republican Party, which in turn made the conservative side the dominant philosophy for the next 10 years. Jimmy Carter, the Democratic president, with the OPEC energy crisis, lost much domestic approval from American citizens and thus lowered his popularity, which decreased domestic support for the Democratic Party. Reagan's support came from domestic concerns with the other two parties, being the moderate side of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. They both lost domestic appeal with the Watergate scandal and the OPEC energy crises, and this led to the rise of young conservative Republicans who pushed the conservative agenda behind Ronald Reagan. Everyone got that? Bobbleheads today? Alright. That's Ronald Reagan.
So we've talked about Richard Nixon's problems and basically Jimmy Carter's problems and why they basically couldn't function as a good leader for the U.S. And basically Ronald Reagan came out as basically a hero since he was after two presidents that failed to basically help the U.S. in time of need. And Reagan, I guess he emerged as a redeemer for the nation at like a time of need. And Nixon, he couldn't deal with the media very well. He basically was the enemy of the media. Question.
What do you mean he's the enemy of the media?
Basically, the media, after what happened at Watergate, the media tried doing anything they could to get Nixon out of office and basically expose the truth behind the government walls. And Ronald Reagan, on the other hand, he basically used his personality to benefit from the media. He used the media and basically had it on his side. Reagan used his personality, his public speaking, and he looked for people. He basically used the media and he used it to helped himself gain influence. Now, dealing with Nixon and the media such as the Washington Post and reporters such as Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, they fought against Nixon and they tried to uncover the truth and expose basically the lies that the government was giving the people dealing with Watergate. And eventually, the media was successful in dealing with Nixon because they brought Nixon down from power after basically him lying of not participating in the Watergate crime. Any questions? Steven?
What do you mean the media brought Nixon down from power?
Basically, Nixon was brought down from power by the media because the media, such as the news and TV channels and Washington Post, they exposed the truth, and after the Supreme Court got involved, Nixon basically had the tapes showed that Nixon was involved because he halted the FBI from investigating because he said that it was a national security matter, it's not for the FBI to deal with.
To conclude Cole's point, the watchdog media, they more oversaw the government than we've been used to in the past. Cole?
What does that actually mean that they oversaw the government?
Reporters now, instead of leaving government workers alone and not seeing into their personal lives, would delve in deeper to try to uncover stuff. This made Reagan much more popular because he used the media to his advantage much more than Nixon and Carter did, which made him much more trustworthy and the public approved of him. Now, for the wrap up, Reagan's policies were much different than those of Carter and Nixon, as you can see. His approaches were much more conservative than the past presidents, even past Republicans, who, before Goldwater's Republican conservatives, tended to be more moderate. He was much more popular with his policies than that of Nixon and Carter because he never really experienced a foreign energy threat like them, and he had a much better working relationship with the media. So, cheery bye, have a summer, class dismissed.
오빤 강남스타일 강남스타일 낮에는 따사로운 인간적인 여자 커피 한 잔에 여유를 아는 품격 있는 여자 밤이 오면 심장이 뜨거워지는 여자 그런 반전 있는 여자 너는 선호해 낮에는 너만큼 따사로운 그런 선호해 커피 식기도 전에 원샷 때리는 선호해 밤이 오면 심장이 터져버리는 선호해 그런 선호해 아름다워 사랑스러워 그래 너 hey. 그래 바로 너 hey. 아름다워 사랑스러워 그래 너 hey. 그래 바로 너 hey. 지금부터 갈 때까지 가볼까 오빤 강남스타일